Before I say anything else, let me be clear about one thing. You must forgive everyone who has ever hurt you, every single person. That is not the debate in this video. That is not what the title is questioning. The Bible is not ambiguous about forgiveness. Colossians 3 verse 13 says, "As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive." There is no asterisk. There is no list of exceptions. You forgive. That part is settled. But somewhere along the way, the church quietly expanded the definition of forgiveness to include a set of obligations that God never actually placed on you. Forgiveness began to mean reconciliation. It began to mean restored trust. It began to mean reopening the door to people who walked through it once and destroyed what was on the other side. And millions of Christians are now living under a version of forgiveness that is slowly breaking them. Not because forgiveness is wrong, but because what they were handed under that name was never what God meant. Today we're going to look at 6 situations where the church has been teaching something beyond what Scripture actually requires. These are not 6 people you stop forgiving. These are 6 people you forgive, and then the obligation ends there. The first is someone who hurt you and has never acknowledged it. The church version of forgiveness often comes with an unspoken requirement: that you behave as though it did not happen, that you not mention it, that you not hold it as honest information about who that person is, that you fold the hurt back inside yourself and present a face of warmth and normalcy as visible proof that you have truly forgiven. But forgiveness and pretending are not the same thing. Forgiveness releases you from the obligation to pursue retaliation or to carry hatred. It does not require you to erase accurate knowledge about a person from your life. Luke 17 verse 3 says, "If your brother sins, rebuke him." That is not the instruction of someone who requires you to behave as though nothing happened. You can fully forgive someone and still hold an honest assessment of who they are and what they did. Forgiveness does not require you to perform amnesia for other people's comfort. You can forgive completely and still know exactly what you are dealing with. The second is someone who apologizes in a cycle but never actually changes. The pattern is familiar. They hurt you. There is a confrontation. They apologize, sometimes genuinely and with obvious emotion. You forgive and restore things to where they were. And then the exact same behavior reappears because the apology was real, but the change underneath it was never made. Many Christians have been taught that forgiving this person means restoring full access every single time the cycle resets. But that interpretation confuses 2 completely separate things. Forgiveness is what you extend for your own sake and in obedience to God. The restoration of trust is something the other person builds through sustained changed behavior over time. Luke 6:43 says, "A good tree does not produce bad fruit." The fruit tells you what you are actually dealing with. An apology is not fruit. Consistent changed behavior over time is fruit. You can forgive someone wholeheartedly and simultaneously refuse to restore the level of access that allowed the harm to keep repeating. Those 2 things are not in conflict with each other. The third is someone who wounded you in a context of significant power imbalance, abuse, exploitation, or spiritual authority misused against someone who was vulnerable. The church has sometimes applied forgiveness in these situations in a way that silences the person who was hurt and protects the person who caused the harm. Victims have been told to forgive and move forward in ways that functionally serve the perpetrator and burden the survivor. But forgiveness does not mean silence. Forgiveness does not mean protecting the reputation of someone who caused serious harm. It does not mean that what happened gets softened in the telling, or that the person who did it gets shielded from consequences. Ephesians 5:11 says to have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. Exposure and forgiveness are not opposites. You can forgive someone and still tell the truth about what they did. You can release them from your personal hatred and still refuse to participate in a culture of silence that protects the pattern and endangers others. The fourth is a family member whose ongoing presence consistently damages your home, your children, or your household's peace. Family relationships are where the wrong version of forgiveness does the most damage because the obligation feels the strongest. The cultural and often religious pressure to maintain family access regardless of the cost is enormous. But Proverbs 22:3 says, "The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it." Wisdom sees a threat and responds to it, even when the threat wears the face of someone you love. Forgiving a family member does not require giving them unlimited access to your home, your children, your emotional resources, or your peace. You can love someone, pray for someone, genuinely release the resentment towards someone, and still maintain clear boundaries on how and how often that person enters your life and your household. Forgiveness is not the same thing as access, and no family title automatically overrides the wisdom of protecting what God has placed in your care. The fifth is someone who uses your public forgiveness as social proof that what they did was not serious. In certain church and community contexts, the expectation is not just that you forgive, but that you demonstrate the forgiveness visibly, reconcile publicly, stand beside them, reaffirm the relationship in ways that communicate to everyone watching that the matter was minor enough to be absorbed without consequence. This is not forgiveness. This is performance being demanded of the wounded person for the benefit of the person who caused the wound. Matthew 6 verse 3 says, "When you give, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." The principle of the private internal act applies here as well. Forgiveness happens between you and God. It does not require a public ceremony that is designed primarily to manage the reputation of the person who hurt you. You owe the forgiveness in your heart. You do not owe a performance of it that erases the accountability the situation actually required. The sixth is someone who has not changed and is currently in a position to hurt you in the same way again. The most important clarification in this entire video is this: forgiveness is not the same as trust, and trust is not something you are required to restore simply because you have forgiven. Trust is earned. It is built through consistent, observable, time-tested change. You can extend complete forgiveness to someone, release the debt, release the anger, release the right to retaliation, and still make a wise decision to maintain a distance that reflects the reality of who that person has continued to demonstrate they are. 2 Corinthians 6:14 says, "Do not be unequally yoked." The principle is movement together in the same direction. You cannot move forward in your life while being continuously pulled backward by someone who has shown consistently that their direction is not yours. Forgiving them does not require you to reattach yourself to the weight of what they have shown you. They will continue to do. Here is what all 6 of these situations have in common. In every single one, the forgiveness is real and it is required. God never exempts you from forgiving. What is not required in any of these situations is the expanded version of forgiveness that the church quietly added, the part that demands reconciliation, restored trust, ongoing access, public performance, and sustained proximity to repeated harm. Forgiveness releases how from the debt of resentment. It does not release the other person from the natural consequences of their choices. It does not obligate you to rebuild what they destroyed, and it does not require you to remove every protective boundary in order to prove that the forgiveness was sincere. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Guard your heart above all things, for from it flows the issues of life." Guarding your heart is not bitterness, it is stewardship. And genuine forgiveness never asked you to stop being a wise steward of what God placed in your care. Subscribe for more content that tells you the truth about what Scripture actually says versus what we have been taught it says. And share this with someone who has been carrying guilt over a boundary they were right to hold.